Hello, massive throngs of nerds. I'm Tom Gerhardt, this is Dan Provost, and I'm squeaking a little bit, I think. And yeah, we have a small design shop called Studio Neat, as Andy said. But first off, we'd like to thank both Andy's and everyone else who's made this XOXO possible. I mean, I guess a lot of you made it possible as well. We're just humbled to be here speaking to you guys this morning, so hopefully we don't blow it. So 2 years ago, I'm just going to power through. 2 years ago, we started a company called Studio Neat, and we started it with just a little simple idea for a tripod mountain stand for the iPhone, right? And we called it the Glyph, and we put it up on Kickstarter, not knowing what would happen, right? We had no intention of starting a business. We just wanted this little thing to exist in the world because we loved it, right? But on the first day of the campaign, we tripled our goal and things went absolutely crazy. All of a sudden, we had a business on our hands. So within when we had no expectation of that. Then after a few months of kind of working through all this new stuff like manufacturing and starting a business and just all of this crazy stuff, we had fulfilled all of our Kickstarter backers for the Glyph, started selling it online. And then we set our sights on a second project that we called the Cosmonaut. It's a wide grip capacitive stylus for touchscreens. We had a Kickstarter campaign for that as well, and we had similar results. Since then, we've released an iOS app called Frameographer. It is for making stop motion and time-lapse movies. And then just a few weeks ago, we independently published a book about design entrepreneurship called It Will Be Exhilarating. So it's been a crazy ride over the past 2 years of us being in business. We went from having zero industrial design experience, marketing, manufacturing, to having 4 products in the marketplace and a sustainable business. So today, we're going to share with you kind of 15 things we've learned along the way. Thanks.
Okay, lesson number 1, scratch your own itch. So this blurry photograph is essentially why we designed the Glyph. It was June of 2010, and we had just got our new iPhones. We were super excited about them. It was honestly the best camera we had ever owned, but we were having this happening. So we wanted a way to mount our iPhones to a tripod so we could take better pictures and video. So we scratched our own itch, and we designed a solution. So one thing we realized through all this is that if you have a problem, somebody else probably has the same one. We found an audience by solving problems that we have with the assumption that they're shared problems. There's this other term in the tech world, the expression eating your own dog food, and this applies to us as well. We're constantly using the products that we create, so we feel we can assess how good they are and how they can be improved. All that being said, it's really just a starting point. It's not really a way to solve the world's larger problems, but we found it's a great way to get started.
Okay, so number 2, keep it simple. So simplicity has been something that has been really critical to our design process from the beginning and everything we do at Studio Neat. So we value simplicity so highly because we believe pursuing it leads to really great design and then in turn really great user experience, which makes our customers happy, etc. But beyond the design of our products, our entire kind of business operations are built around the idea of keeping it simple. So Studio Neat is just a 2-man shop. It's only us. And we've actually worked really hard to keep it that way. We like staying small because it affords us a couple really key benefits. One of those is agility. So being really tiny lets us move around and transition quickly. So if we need to make a decision on something, I just turn to Dan, we talk about it, and then once we decide, it's done, right? This may seem like a really trivial kind of little thing, but waiting a day to get the okay from someone up higher up or someone else on the design team really bogs down the design process. And so it's really nice to be able to just quickly make decisions. Another one that's super important is focus. So being such a small company means that we can't work on anything or really everything, and we have really limited resources, right? So if we didn't have focus on each individual little project, we wouldn't finish anything, and we would just go down in flames. So that means we have to say no a lot, right? So we only spend time on ideas that we think are really, really great, and if one of those ideas starts to feel not so great along the way, we're not afraid to just say no and just shut things down and stop. So that kind of focus is really critical to our success. And it means we have the time to obsess over the little tiny details in each project and get them right, and that's really where you get the best design.
Okay, number 3, sell your stuff for money. This is the part of the presentation where we become staunch capitalists. Okay, so we all know who this guy is. It's kind of old news by now at this point. He shot and edited his own 1-hour comedy special and then sold it directly to fans for $5, essentially cutting out all middlemen. So this is actually quite refreshing, this idea of creating something of value and then selling it for money. But what about for the rest of us? So Louis C.K. is obviously a known and established comedian, but what do the rest of us do? So there's this guy, Kevin Kelly, who's one of the founding editors of Wired magazine, and he came up with this idea called 1,000 True Fans. And basically what it needs is a creator of content needs to have at least 1,000 fans in order to make a sustainable living. In this case, a fan is defined as someone who can consistently be relied on to purchase your products. So if you look at this kind of classic long-tail graph of blockbuster success on one end and obscurity on the other end, this 1,000 fans number is not important, but what is important is there's this sweet spot on the graph in between blockbuster and obscurity. So we actually find this very encouraging because it basically means your audience can actually be much smaller than you think. So what this really all comes down to is directness. This idea of the creators and the customers or fans being directly connected. I mean, Kickstarter is kind of the quintessential example of this. We've learned that people like to feel that direct connection with themselves and who is making the products that they're buying.
So number 4, you can't please everyone. So when we started thinking about the glyph, we decided we were only going to design it for kind of the latest and greatest smartphone at the time, which was the iPhone 4. So instead of worrying about the hundreds of cases out there and like how we would design for them, we could focus on one little phone, and we actually designed it for just like a naked phone. Now, that meant we had a really clear problem, we had a clear form factor, we knew what we were designing for, but it also meant, of course, that we had a super limited market, right? We didn't have all the iPhones, just kind of this little sliver. But if we hadn't have intentionally limited our market like that from the get-go, we wouldn't have ended up with such an elegant design. So building in constraints into your design process from the get-go, like having an intentionally small audience, is really, really helpful. And they help you narrow down the problem, and they kind of let you rule out design directions really quickly.
All right, number 5, learn by doing. This is one of my favorite quotes from Stanley Kubrick. Perhaps it sounds ridiculous, but the best thing that young filmmakers should do is to get hold of a camera and some film and make a movie of any kind at all. So we definitely took this to heart when we launched our first Kickstarter project for the glyph. Prior to launching it, we had no manufacturing, retail, or even traditional industrial design experience. But we were confident that we had a nifty little gadget and that we could learn as we went. And a lot of the time, we were just flying by the seat of our pants, but it ended up working out. For our second campaign, for the Cosmonaut, we had been around the block before, so we were confident. But it turns out the Cosmonaut was significantly more complex than the glyph. It required knowledge and expertise that was way out of our wheelhouse. So it was delayed several months. It was a very painful experience. We had 6,000 anxious backers waiting for their stylist. But in hindsight, we learned something important. If we didn't have those 6,000 backers, breathing down our necks, we probably would have given up, honestly. So the lesson here is that sometimes it's best to jump off the cliff and build the plane on the way down. So it sounds ridiculous, but, and this isn't just carte blanche to throw out any crazy or risky idea, but in our experience at least, it pushed us to make something that we otherwise wouldn't have thought possible.
Okay, number 6, atoms are the new bits. So, for a while now, we've been able to manipulate, bits and bytes at will. You remember how exciting it was when it's like, oh, I can edit images and video and like on my computer. This is crazy, all from my desk. Well, now all of that is happening for the physical stuff in our world, right? So you can sit at a desk now and make anything. And one of the technologies we used a whole bunch when we were designing the glyph is 3D printing. So when we started working on the glyph, we went from like sketches in our little Moleskine sketchbook to having a piece of plastic, a real piece of plastic in our hands in like a couple weeks. And that is just like, it's crazy. If it wasn't for enabling technologies like 3D printing, all this different stuff, we wouldn't have a company, and we definitely wouldn't have a glyph. So all this stuff is really exciting. And with the cosmonaut, we had a way more difficult challenge. So not only did we have to figure out all the physical stuff like size, weight, the feel of it, we had all these material engineering challenges. So that means we had to make all sorts of prototypes. We had aluminum machined down to like 1/1000th of an inch like tolerances. We had these like whole bunch of test capacitive tips made. We had like water jet cut plastic. We really did everything. So needless to say, that was kind of a really long and expensive and kind of nerve-wracking process. But it was just like incredibly empowering to be able to even do this stuff. And we sit at our desks and just kind of specify all this great stuff. It comes back to us, we test it out. So we're just living in really exciting times.
All right, number 7, keep the core in-house and outsource the rest. So here's a personal example. When we were working on Frameographer, which is our iPhone app, it was a really busy time for us. We were working on some other things. So we had this idea to design the app fully, like the UI and the graphic design, and then offload the development work to a couple friends of ours. And long story short, it didn't work out. We ended up taking the project back over, and Tom learned iOS development, and then we ended up completing it ourselves. So what we learned, which seems obvious now, is that the development was integral to the product, and so we should have been the ones working on it all along. So conversely, you don't always need to do everything yourself. We've learned what to outsource. So like a large percentage of the people in this room, I'm sure, the inclination is to do everything yourself. And the fact is, you probably could do everything yourself. But for us, it cuts into what we care most about, which is spending our time designing. So things like bookkeeping and accounting and even order fulfillment, it's been a huge relief to offload this work so we can focus on design. So it really comes down to this simple pie chart. Our time is finite, so we want to spend the largest percentage of time designing products and in turn minimizing the amount of time we're doing anything else.
Don't forget snack time.
Yeah.
Number 8, make it in America. So all the parts and like packaging that go into our products are all made in America. Most of the manufacturing and assembly is done in South Dakota, but we have parts coming from everywhere. Massachusetts, New Jersey, Chicago, Minneapolis. But when we started, we assumed, like everything else and everyone else, that we'd have to get our stuff made in China. But it turns out for the quantities that we order and the type of stuff that we make, we actually save money getting our stuff made in America. But beyond like the economics of it, there's some really great advantages. First and foremost, it's the people. This is Joel, our design engineer at Premier Source in South Dakota. And he is one of a handful of people who make our stuff. And the key is we have his cell phone number, right? So for two guys like us with like very little experience, it's critical to have people and partners that can help guide you through the process, right? They were there when we were like, how do we do this? They're like, oh, we'll show you. So having that's really important. We also get to visit these places, which is super cool. So we've loved being really directly involved in the things that we make. So being there in the factory when the first ones like roll off the little conveyor belt is really cool. Of course, you can visit places in China, and I'm sure you can develop great relationships with partners there, but I think it's just a whole heck of a lot harder for little companies like us. So consider making your stuff in America. It's totally possible and has a lot of upsides.
All right, number 9, patents are overrated.
There's a caveat.
Yeah, this one's a little bit controversial, and we should probably preface by saying we are not lawyers. So the qualification for the statement is patents are overrated for us. Us being a small company of 2 people with limited resources and products that have a somewhat limited lifespan. So basically what we've learned is that patents are a bet. They're a bet that large companies like Apple and Samsung can afford to make, but are out of reach for us. We've also learned that people generally have a misconception about patents. They think they're these kind of magical force fields that protect your product from all knockoffs, but it's actually not the case. They're incredibly hard to obtain, they're expensive, and then if litigation happens, that is also expensive and lengthy and just generally soul-sucking. So as we mentioned before, we want to spend the largest percentage possible designing things and not in litigation. This is a very painful slide to show you guys. That is the glyph on the left and the sidekick out of Taiwan on the right. In fairness to the sidekick, they did innovate by adding a hang tag to the packaging. So anyways, the point of showing this is that even if we did have a design patent, it wouldn't matter. We would still need an international patent, which is even more out of reach for a company like this. And let's say we were able to successfully litigate. Who's to say 1 week later another product wouldn't show up a week later? So basically what we've resigned to is we can't spend our time worrying about this. Our time is just best spent innovating and designing new things and diversifying our product lineup.
Number 10, retail is not necessary. So the vast majority of our revenue comes from online direct sales. We have an e-commerce website, studioneat.com, where people can buy all of our products. And it hooks into our fulfillment service. So if you order something, the next day it ships out for just a couple bucks. We also sell stuff on Amazon.com in the US, and they handle all the fulfillment and customer service related to those orders. And although we're just a little small company, our reach is global. So we were preparing for this presentation. We're like, oh, I wonder how many companies or countries we've sold to in the world. And we're like, what, 129? Like, what? So we realized that we have this huge global reach, and it's just from our tiny little website. But our way of doing business is just like completely opposite than most other businesses out there. Typically, after you have produced something, you get your product manufactured, and then you strike up a deal with the distributor, and then they sell your stuff to retailers all over the place. The problem there is in the margins, though. So retailers take at least 50% right off the top, and then the distributors need to get paid, and so on and so on. And so you end up with just a very tiny little sliver of profit at the end of the day, which means you got to make it up in volume. So for us, it just didn't make any sense, right? So why would the store who sells the thing make more money than the guys who make it? Didn't really make sense. But we're a little bit of an edge case. Our customers are really comfortable buying stuff online, and our stuff is small and easy to ship. So if you're selling like a chair or like a kitchen appliance, it's a lot harder path to do this online-only thing. But times are changing a lot. So businesses like Warby Parker with their designy glasses, and Zappos with shoes, and Dollar Shave Club with their razors are showing that like all different kinds of businesses can have success with this online-only storefront. So it's a really exciting time to be a small independent producer right now because you have this huge global reach that you can take advantage of.
Okay, number 11, tell a story. Another key thing we've learned is that people actually do want to see how the sausage gets made. We discovered this early on when we released a Kickstarter update for our glyph project, which showed a time lapse of us assembling some of the glyph prototypes, and people just ate it up. And then subsequent updates showing trips to the factories or assembling the product were also well received. We've learned that people love to know where things come from, how they're made, and who is making them. So here's another example. This is Instapaper, an app that does a pretty boring thing, saving web pages to read later. But people love this app, and they feel very strongly about it. But why? The app is indeed awesome, but it's more than that. We think it has to do with the creator, Marco Arment, being a pretty likable guy. He has an awesome podcast on the 5x5 network where he offers insight into app development. He has a great blog that's filled with tech commentary and LED light bulb reviews. And of course, he has an active Twitter presence. So we think what this comes down to is this idea of personifying products. Instapaper is interesting in part because of Marco. By offering so much transparency and openness into the process, it creates a personal relationship with the product. Customers feel connected to a human, not just some faceless product or piece of software.
Okay, number 12, respect your customers. This one's pretty simple, really. Just put yourself in your customers or like clients' shoes, and don't be a pain and don't be annoying. So the little things really matter here. So for instance, all of our prices are whole numbers. We aren't trying to do the like 1999 trick on anyone. This is another really annoying one. The little check boxes that ask if you want to be included on an email list should default to no, not yes. Like why are you trying to trick someone into signing up for your email list? They'll just resent you for it. It doesn't make any sense. So, but all this little tiny stuff, shows that you get your customers, right? It shows that you get it and that you're on their side and that you want to make them happy. So all that stuff is important. I missed a slide. So this is what it comes down to, basically, right? Is we try to behave like the company we want to see in the world.
Okay, number 13, under-promise and over-deliver. So this applies to many things, obviously, but specifically what we've been observing on Kickstarter and in our own experience. So there was some recent research, I don't know how correct it is, but it said that 75% of Kickstarter projects in the design and technology categories failed to deliver their rewards on time. We certainly experienced that ourselves with the Cosmonaut when we were 6 months late in delivering. We thought we had a good handle on the timeline, but it turns out we didn't. So it can be exciting to set an ambitious delivery date, but obviously it's disappointing when the date is missed. So I think the lesson here is deadlines are not a feature. The beginning of a project is actually when you know the least about the timetable. So it's the worst time to be setting a deadline. So in general, it's just best to avoid deadlines altogether, or if you have to set one, then set an extremely generous one.
Number 14, the Gruber effect. There's always been people out there who have had great influence on the world, right? Oprah and her book club is a really great example. She would be like, oh, I think this book is great, and then it would sell like 1 million copies instantly, which is awesome, right? Well, but now with the internet, you don't need to attract the gaze of these huge media giants like the New York Times or Oprah to get that sort of attention. So there are single individuals out there who wield great power, but in niche interest groups, right? So John Gruber, who writes an Apple-centric technology blog called Daring Fireball, is one of these mavens, right? He has millions of monthly readers, and when he recommends something, it usually takes off like a rocket. Partly it's because he has great taste, but also it's because his readers trust what he has to say, right? It's more like a friend's recommendation than some just stranger on the internet. On the day we launched the Glyph, John posted this on Daring Fireball, and this spike happened. So we tripled our initial goal that first day, and our minds were like completely blown. So now, obviously, this isn't going to happen to everyone, and John Gruber's influence is only in kind of a very specific area, but that's the point. So whatever your thing is, there is some maven out there who's probably interested in it, and they can make all the difference. All
right, last one, number 15, passion. Passion should be the main motivator. So your goal should not be to quit your day job or to make a ton of money. The goal should be to make something great that you care deeply about. If you start there, then everything should fall into place. I want to use our friend Tina Roth Eisenberg, also known as Swiss Miss, as an example. I'm sure most of you are familiar with her blog, and if so, her passion for design is obvious. One interesting thing about Tina is she works on these little side projects, like Tattly, the designy temporary tattoos, and Creative Mornings, the breakfast lecture series, or To Do, which is the to-do list app that we both use. In all these examples, Tina started with a design problem she was passionate about solving, and then ended up turning them into businesses. Here's one of our own examples. Several months before the Cosmonaut Kickstarter campaign, we had an idea for a fun little weekend DIY project. We were toying with the idea of styluses for the iPad, and we had this idea that a dry erase marker would make a great stylus because drawing on an iPad feels more like a whiteboard than a piece of paper. So we took this old marker, pulled the ink out, used a little bit of conductive foam and some wire, and we had this little janky makeshift stylus. We liked the way it felt and performed, so we took a few pictures and posted it to our blog. It ended up generating more excitement than we thought, and then 5 months later, we were launching the Cosmonaut Kickstarter campaign. So I think the moral here is to work on something you're passionate about, because if it becomes successful, you'll have to do it all the time. This is definitely something that we've learned from our own experience. So we want to close with one of our favorite quotes. This was written by Yancey Strickler, co-founder of Kickstarter, the day the site went live in 2009. A good idea, well-crafted and pursued with passion, doesn't need a gatekeeper stamp of approval to succeed. Thanks.